In this video, we are going to talk about some Reedy Creek, and we're also going to talk about Universal possibly interested in a reservation system. Some surveys might suggest that may be the case. We're going to talk about it up next. Hey everybody, welcome aboard to another episode of OG55. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I brought my brother, my colleague, producer Dre, Vash Guy, on the show today to talk about all things, well, not all things, but some of the aspects in regards to Reedy Creek and even Universal possibly interested in the reservation system. But before we do that, producer Dre, if you can introduce yourself and let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Hey, best place to interact with me is going to be at Vashka. It's right down there, right at the bottom of my screen there, just like it's spelled. Lots of robust discussion, as Christine Waistlines McCarthy would say. And hey, if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now on Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Yes, yes. All right, so let's dive into our first topic.
Yeah.
So we're gonna discuss Reedy Creek from a from a very interesting kind of perspective. Okay, so I'm gonna set the table a little bit here. There is a content creator by the name of Eric July, who is honestly, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant, kind of smartest voices in nerd culture, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, check out his content. He does phenomenal work. He does a lot of comic content, nerd culture, things like that. Very, very intelligent analysis. Whether you agree or disagree with the guy, he brings it every single time. He touched upon, and this is kind of unique for his content, he touched upon Reedy Creek. He doesn't usually go into the theme park stuff, but he did on his show just the other day. He had a very interesting take on the Reedy Creek situation and a possible solution. Now, Dre, before we play the clip, you've seen this clip. Any pregame thoughts before we play it?
Pre-game thoughts being that Eric July is a little abrasive, maybe a little aggressive, and maybe features some strong language. This is kind of how his style works, but I think the whole total package works. But sometimes that can come off as a little bit jarring, especially for some of our audience here. So just keep that in mind, But it comes from a place of
passion, basically. I think,
yeah, passion and rational thought. As crazy as that might sound, it actually is based in some good, I think, critique. So I think we're ready. I think that's all the pregame that we need. We'll go ahead and play the clip, and we'll get right into it.
Yeah. And I've actually, before we start, I've actually been guilty of that myself. I'm very passionate about Disney parks, and I've made videos completely riddled with the F-bombs. And I'll watch my video after the fact and go, wow, I really did cuss a lot in that video. But when you're passionate about something,
I know.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, I get it. And I don't mind it personally, but some people do,
Yeah,
but that doesn't necessarily degrade their argument. It's sometimes, like you said, OG, it does come from a place of passion. Sometimes, people get emotional, so ain't nothing wrong with that. So we'll go ahead and play it. Don't mind the strong language. I think there's something here, as OG said. So let's go ahead and get to it.
Yep.
Stop the fact that they have these special sort of rights among this geographical area because of some Reedy Creek bullshit and all. Like, okay. But the solution isn't to take that away from them. The solution is, how about we give more people the right to self-govern? Seems pretty obvious. You know why that's not the solution that they would ever advocate? Because that's less money in the state's pocket. Which is really all that it is, right? That's the easy layup, right? Easy layup is, okay, we admit that economically Disney has an advantage over everybody else, right? In that, especially in that territory. instead of taking it away, some sort of self-governing right, why don't you just grant everybody else the same fucking same or similar rights to self-govern, and let's see how the market fucking reacts. That would equal less tax money for the government in the state of Florida. So of course they weren't going to do that. Chicken shit. The solution's right there. It's easy. It's a layup, finger roll, right off the glass, right off the glass. But I don't think oftentimes these guys, well, it's not that I don't think, I know, they aren't really interested in actually solving a problem. It's more of, you know, can we get at our political enemies? And, you know, it's all pay for play at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fascinating perspective on the Reedy Creek thing, and an angle that a lot of people don't really talk about, you know. Right. I'll start with you, Dre. What are your overall thoughts on what Mr. July was saying in regards to his solution for Reedy Creek?
Well, I'll preface my thoughts by saying that I got another clip from actually a lawyer who actually represented Universal at one point, who was looking to Reedy Creek and who had some interesting thoughts on this as well. But I'll just say this. Eric July has a very libertarian perspective, and I do appreciate that perspective, very much so. But I always get a little bit, I don't know, the antenna shoot up a little bit. And the reason why is because a lot of libertarian arguments sound very much like corporatist arguments in a way, right? Where it's like, oh, yeah, you should be able to do your own thing, and the corporation should be able to do whatever they want. It's like, okay, I can see that logic, I can see that argument, but I think it's based in something that's maybe outside of libertarianism in the strictest sense, and this is when corporate interests are at play, and because corporations would love that. Right, and that's why I think they kind of forward and peddle that argument. And some people take it as a libertarian argument, but at the same time, understand what you're advocating for. In this way, and when you talk about Reedy Creek itself, I look, I'll say it like this. There are some special privileges that Disney has been granted with Reedy Creek that would never be granted to them today, I don't think. Right, there are some things where it's just like maybe these things should be reevaluated. And my personal belief is, ever since Progress City was canceled by Disney's board of directors, past Walt's death, that sort of thing, these special privileges, some of these aspects should have been reevaluated, like the ability to set up their own courts, their own police system, maybe their own nuclear power plant, and so forth. Right, as soon as Progress City was off the table, these things should have been looked at again, and they weren't until this moment in time, under different circumstances maybe. But I think the base, the core foundational aspect of they're getting special privileges that others aren't, I think it still applies. I don't think it hurts the argument necessarily, even though the pretext might be under conditions that are maybe can be questioned, right? But to Eric July's comment, though, if you're not going to take back those special privileges for one theme park enterprise, then I do agree with him. I think you should be able to spread these special privileges, which, from what I understand, Universal has its own special district right now. You should be able to spread these special privileges to other theme park proprietors. Outside of setting up your own city in the form of Progress City. If you're going to grant Disney that, I think you absolutely should grant other theme park proprietors those same special privileges in line with a theme park operation.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea because there's been a lot of talk about kind of evening the playing field in Orlando. And one way to do that, one direction for that goal would be just basically eliminating Reedy Creek and sort of, equaling it that way. And then Eric July comes in with a very interesting perspective saying, okay, how about we don't take away the special district from Disney. We just give, like, say, Universal that same, that same kind of privilege, and let's equalize it that way. And that's fascinating because, look, DeSantis wanted to kind of send Disney a message. Hey, look, you know what? You're trying to affect Florida politics, so you're going to kind of be punished for that. Well, this would actually punish Disney quite a bit too. I mean, even though they're not taking away necessarily the special privileges from Disney, they're maintaining it by giving Universal, who is hungry right now. Universal is hungry right now in that theme park game. They're in beast mode even without these special privileges. Yes. I couldn't imagine what Universal would do completely unleashed. Okay, it would. And to Eric July's point, like, you know, let the market kind of like, you know, sort that out. And I think the market would. I think it would be a huge boon for Orlando. But it's an interesting perspective. I only think the only thing that I kind of would maybe disagree with a little bit is giving everyone that right. He mentions kind of giving everyone the right to kind of self-govern. I'm not a libertarian, so I see things a little differently politically, sure, you know. But in terms of like these big, hey, look, in Florida, maybe, you know, just you have to meet a certain threshold to kind of gain these kind of privileges. You know, if you're an operator in the state that employs X number of people, you get your own special district or something. Hey, that would be fine. You know, maybe these bigger entities can get it. That might work. I don't know. It's an interesting perspective though. And I think it's something that should definitely be looked at. Now, he did mention that the reason why that really wasn't in the conversation was because it's less money for the government.
Yep.
If you have these special districts, that's less revenue for the state. So that's exactly why this was not on the table. And there's nothing wrong with that. Look, the government, they're looking to make revenue on those tax dollars. So something like this isn't of interest to them. And I get it. I understand that, you know, but I think Eric is right in that. I think that they definitely did kind of leave that out of the equation. That option was conveniently left out because of that factor. I think this approach of taking the special district away from Disney is more beneficial to the state because they would make more money on that. So I think that there's a good point there to be made.
Sure, true. I mean, money is a huge factor, right? But even just think about it politically and operationally, and the popularity of an argument like that. I mean, you know, right now, for example, Reedy Creek has the ability to pass its own building permits. Right. And you know, and that's completely outside the jurisdiction of the counties and the city and so forth. Would we necessarily afford that to everybody, you know, in the state of Florida? I mean, think about that for a second, right? You buy a home and somebody put in an addition and you didn't realize that it was, you know, let's say built with shoddy workmanship because, you know, some codes would have probably mandated that it be built up to a certain quality standard. You don't know, you know, when you buy it and now you're left with this kind of lemon, so to speak, right? We have these kind of regulations for a reason. I'm not saying that, you know, the argument for or against regulation in terms of that is definitely a debate that people have, but I think one can understand that those are there for a reason.
Right.
And it's, I think even the popularity of something like that, you know, being broadly done on a state level, even within the area of theme park proprietors, I think is an unpopular position for the people of Florida. You know, if something like that were to be forwarded by the legislature, just even outside of money. Look, my thing is they're you know, DeSantis has said, and this is what DeSantis has kind of changed his kind of argument, like, hey, you know what, we're just setting Disney on the same playing field as everybody else, right? He's changed that for a reason, because I think people can, even if they agree or disagree with the pretext in which this all happened, I think most people will agree that that probably should be the case. Now, Eric July is going the opposite direction in that, right? He's saying, yeah, you know what? You're right. Everybody should have these special privileges. Whereas DeSantis is saying everybody should be under the same special privilege as established by the Florida legislature in 1968 and beyond. So that's kind of what he's saying there. But it's fascinating because, like I said, there's a famous kind of law tuber, right? Legal mindset who actually worked for Universal in their corporate offices, and he retells a story about how as soon as he came in, that Universal was looking to get a situation similar to Reedy Creek back in the 1990s or whatever. And I think he had kind of a fascinating take on it. So I wanted to play that for the audience. Here we go.
Let's do it.
That's unique. Universal doesn't have the same treatment. SeaWorld doesn't have the same treatment. No other theme park in Central Florida has the same treatment. And in fact, when I was representing Universal, one of the things we were interested in exploring was, is it possible to get us a Reedy Creek? Is it possible to have us form a district like that? Well, the answer is no. There was no political will in the 2020s, early 2000s to form a district like that, because a lot of people, even then, thought it shouldn't have existed in the first place. This is something we never should have allowed. The fact that this has been banned, this was really just a convenient time to get rid of something that, frankly, should never have been allowed in the first place.
And I will have to kind of touch upon a little bit something when he said there was no political will to get that done for Universal. And I think that touches upon what Eric July said. There's no money in that. The state's not, there's no political will because there's no money for the politicians if they did it.
Right. And yes, that is very true. Like I said, money is definitely a thing, but the ability to set up your own nuclear power plant, you know, I don't think any politician is going to be necessarily popular for giving away all that much, right? We're seeing right now in Anaheim right now how it was incredibly unpopular just to sell the Anaheim Stadium real estate for as low as they did. And how that came as a big backfire, and it's like, oh, let's look at some improprieties here, you know. I think the political will. I think that speaks to two levels. I think it speaks to your level, OG, and I think it speaks to the level that it might not necessarily be the most popular decision. And even in 1967, when they passed the Reedy Creek Improvement District Act. In 1968, they were like, we're never doing this again. You know, let's amend the Florida Constitution in order to prevent this. Because even then, they felt that they were, they may have given away the farm when they didn't necessarily have to. And we've discussed before about how that whole process happened and how Disney pitted the Florida legislature against the the Sierra project and stuff like that, and how they were able to get the deal they did. But it's it's quite fascinating how this whole thing has come about. I think, yes, the pretext is definitely something that people can argue about for sure, but I think this has been a long time coming, and unfortunately it happened under these conditions, which Disney understood previously. This is why they donated to campaigns across the board, whether they be Republican or Democrat, whoever was in charge of Florida at the time, because I think they understood how fragile this whole arrangement was.
Yeah, no, 100%. Fascinating debate. And if you want to check out Eric July's content, I'm going to link his channel down below. I highly suggest it. I don't agree with Mr. July on a lot, but his content is captivating. I can binge his content all day long. And part of the reason why, and Dre, you touched upon it, is passion. The dude is passionate, very passionate about what he talks about: comics, nerd culture, politics, and I love that. I love people that have that fire, you know.
I understand. I completely understand. Even people who I don't necessarily agree with, I love to see the passion as well. Yeah,
100%. And he brought an interesting angle to this that it was fun talking about. So comment down below what you think about, the proposal that Eric suggested. What do you think about the clip from Valiant Renegade, which I will also link down below? What are your opinions on this whole Reedy Creek thing? So it's an interesting debate to be had for sure. For sure. So we're going to move on to topic number 2 now, which comes from our friends over at Fresh Baked. So Dave did a video the other day where he dedicated a few minutes to Universal. And this is interesting. I guess he received a survey from Universal asking a lot of questions that it was pretty interesting, the questions they were asking. Because, we know as Disney fans, when Disney puts questions in surveys, it's not by accident. I'm sure it's the same thing with Universal. So he was kind of making an intellectual sort of, I guess, intellectual assumption or kind of deducting certain things from the survey. So we're going to play what he had to say here. And then on the other end of it, we'll kind of break it down and give our opinions. Go ahead, Oh, go ahead, Vash. I'm sorry.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. We will definitely break this down. But there's also a survey that Disney themselves put out that references Universal as well. So they are definitely, attempting to see what, the guests of each respective resort is actually, doing, what their mindset is and so forth. And I want to play that one as well.
Absolutely.
So let's go ahead and play this first. And we'll get into it, and then we'll play that other one later.
Absolutely.
How do you like that reservation system? Now we're talking. Universal doesn't have a reservation system. Are they thinking about doing it? Keep in mind, they're not asking this for fun. This is not just idle chit-chat that they're having here. There's a purpose to this. The purpose is they're probably thinking about it. They would ask this question only if they were considering doing this themselves, which, by the way, should be another clue for those observing this situation that the reservation system isn't so much about inventory management or cast management. It's about putting guests in the park when you want them, what days and what times you want them. Universal is watching, they're observing, and they may have noticed or maybe being told that it's working with respect to Disneyland being able to get, they've turned guests who normally only go on the weekends, and they've turned us into weekday visitors. That's a win. Because I'll tell you what, I went to Universal, a couple months ago on a weekday. Dead as disco. I walked onto every attraction, including some of the biggest ones. But then I went later, a few weeks ago on a Saturday, and I'll tell you what, I was very grateful that I had upgraded my pass to include the Express, the Platinum Pass with the Express, and I was able to use their Fast Pass system because the waits were an hour or more. So I think Universal they want to do something like that. I do think that they're very interested in getting guests into the park more often on a weekday. By the way,
there you go.
It's a fascinating argument that Dave is making here, and look, I mean, I don't think he's too off base in that. I think they're surveying it for a reason. I think from a business perspective, I think we all can kind of agree. I think that from a business perspective, the reservation system at Disney makes a lot of sense. I mean, Chapek is kind of a genius when it comes to this kind of like yield management, business, corporate thing, right?
Yes.
So there's no doubt it's beneficial to the executives and to the company, right?
Yeah.
So I can definitely see what Dave is saying here in that, okay, Universal's a big company too. I mean, it's owned by Comcast, and they're looking to sort of duplicate like that same kind of financial success, so to speak. And they're putting their feelers out a little bit, saying, okay, well, what do our fans think about that? Is there an appetite for that? Now, I don't think there is. I think the reservation system is extremely unpopular at Disney, very unpopular. I can't imagine that the Universal surveys in regards to that are on the positive side for reservations. I can't even fathom that. But I do think the surveys are not by accident. And I do think they are kind of the fact that those questions are there. I would kind of agree with Dave that I think that they're definitely considering it. Will it happen? Probably not.
I would generally agree with that for sure. I've always described the reservation system, and I think Dave points this out nicely as like buttered toast, right? You slice off the stick of, the little end of butter right there, you put it on the toast, right? And honestly, if you don't spread it out with a butter knife, well, that's what it was before the reservation system. You got all this butter right here, and on other parts of the bread, right, you don't have much butter. Similar to how it worked before a reservation system, where people, really went on the weekends, but they didn't necessarily go on the weekdays. And what the reservation system is just taking that butter knife and just spreading out that butter across the toast, right? Yep. In a similar way here, people are like, oh, I'm locked out of Saturday. Maybe I'll go on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and so forth. I think a lot of that, too, can be accomplished with pricing. With different pricing structures. From what I understand, Universal has implemented a system like that, but to Fresh Bake's credit here, I mean, he did go on those weekdays and he did find that it was, there was some lack of attendance there. And I think operationally, I think a theme park proprietor would like to implement a system like that to better balance out those crowds. That way, you don't have to necessarily feast or famine kind of thing, right? You have a balanced operation. But at the same time, it's like the kind of overhead that you have to implement a system like that, the kind of guest feedback that you get, I would tell Universal, I don't think I don't think you want to go this route. And maybe that's what they were probing. Maybe they were probing, hey, just how unpopular is this kind of thing? Right. Which, by the way, might be considerable because there's another survey that speaks to this. But before I play it, OG, any more thoughts from you on this, sir?
No, I think, look, these surveys, they're feelers. These surveys are always they're kind of feelers. They kind of sense what a certain audience is kind of feeling, where they're kind of at. And I think Universal is kind of dipping their toe in it. I think Universal, from a business perspective, like I said before, I think they're interested in it. I just don't think that they're not really sure how their audience would necessarily, respond to that. I do think it's interesting, though, that the reservation system at Disney, like you said, and Dave has mentioned, it's spreading those crowds out. I wonder if there's a correlation between Disney being able to spread those crowds out and fill those weekday spots in, and Universal being so dead on the weekdays. Like, if everyone's going to Disney on the weekdays because they have to because of that reservation system, is that impacting Universal's numbers on the weekdays? That's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know if there's a connection, but there might be.
There might be. It's an interesting point. I didn't really necessarily realize that, but there's definitely a lot of overlap between the Universal guest and the Disneyland guest. And maybe that reservation system is having an effect on other theme park proprietors. Never thought about it, but I think you make an astute observation. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and play this next clip here. This is going to be audio only. Okay. This is between Jim Hill of Jim Hill Media and Len Testa of Touring Plans. And they have a podcast they do. I believe once a week or whatever, and they talk about all the latest news stories and so forth, but sometimes they'll include surveys in their show. And they had some pretty interesting commentary. They produce a good show for sure, but this one was particular on the nose for what we're talking about here. And Disney might know a thing or two about what they're doing, and I think it's quite fascinating. So here we go.
A quick couple of surveys. We got one from Bubbles. It's a Disney survey. Two interesting questions here related to what we just talked about. One of the questions is this. You may have already mentioned this, but which of the following, if any, are influencing your plan to visit a Universal park instead of a Walt Disney World theme park? Right? And one of the specific answers here is, other theme parks have a better way for me to skip the lines, e.g. Universal Express. And Bubbles actually checked that one. Again, Disney knows that there's an issue, Jim.
Wow.
The other things that Bubbles checked in this one was Disney park passes limit my flexibility or require too much effort, or accommodations offered a benefit or incentive to visit a Universal theme park. And again, if you stay at a deluxe resort at Universal, you get Universal Express automatically. Also, the other thing that Bubbles checked was Universal doesn't require advanced reservations.
Wow.
Yeah.
The fact that those questions, something that naked, that raw.
I know, it's beautiful. The interesting thing is there's a follow-up question on that, and it's Disney asks, during your upcoming stay at a Walt Disney World Resort Hotel, why do you plan to visit a Universal theme park in addition to Walt Disney World? And Bubbles wrote this. Universal's Express Pass is, in our opinion, superior to Genie Plus and Lightning Lane in every possible way. It gives me the flexibility I want, and there's no need to wake up at 7 a.m. or be glued to my phone all day hoping for an availability drop.
Oh, Bubbles! Oh,
wow.
Yeah, not so great right there. Not so great. If I was Disney right now, oh man, that would definitely be concerning. Now, obviously, they were making a more of a note on Genie Plus compared to Express Pass, but as Bubbles indicated on the survey there, did click on park reservations being one of the key factors as to why people might be going to Universal, at least in Universal Studios Florida and the Florida market, why they might be going to Universal Studios Florida over Disney. And I thought that was very, very interesting.
That is interesting. And Disney should definitely take notice. I mean, they should definitely look. I understand the financial benefit for a lot of these systems, like the reservation system and what have you. And I'm not even saying like Disney should completely abandon these systems. I understand that there is a benefit to those things.
I agree.
But I think what Disney needs to do is really look at the landscape and sort of kind of craft these systems in a way that is a little bit more user friendly. I think that you can craft the reservation system in a better way. I think you can craft Genie Plus in a way better way. I think you can keep these things. It's not, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, if Chapek wants his reservation system, you can keep his reservation system. But I think there's better ways to go about this stuff. And I think Disney should really start looking into that. Yeah, I really do. And we've seen it. Universal, their Express Pass, I think most people would agree. I haven't used it personally, but everyone that I've heard talk about it, it's a superior system to Genie Plus. So Disney needs to get on the ground, boots on the ground, and kind of figure out like, okay, what's Universal doing with this? How can we can kind of mold and reimagine our Genie Plus program to get kind of the guest survey results that the Express Pass is getting, you know?
Yeah. And if they could offer that, I mean, I think even if you charge more, I think your guest service would still go up if you're giving them a product that's worth buying. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about it before on the show with Genie Plus and stuff like that, where you know they implement a system and it's ridiculously cheap, and people are still really pissed because you know they just can't get the access that they thought in their heads that they were going to be able to get. Whereas Universal, you know, you buy that and boom, 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 you're on, kind of thing. And it's just a much easier system for not only guests to comprehend but to actually navigate. Right? It's just you know, and I do agree with you. I don't think they need to get, you know, necessarily rid of these systems, but they have to reimagine them in some way. I mean, what if a reservation system was limited to, you know, people just buying day tickets who weren't actually staying at a hotel? Or, you know, we're just limited to annual pass holders. Or you limit it, you know, to the weekends. Or you limit it for the busy seasons. You know, or maybe even the smallest parks, you know, if capacity constraints require that kind of thing. You know, there are ways of doing this. I don't necessarily just piss everybody off and make these vacations even more complex than they already were. Yeah, I remember with FastPass Plus, you know, out there in Walt Disney World, where people would have spreadsheets. And they'd say, "Oh, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this," and then you can add on, you know, all this kind of stuff after the first three. And people already felt that the Walt Disney World operation, the Walt Disney World experience, was too complicated. Just, you know, 2019 and previous.
Right.
And now, post 2020, it has become incredibly complicated, even for the Disneyland experience as well. And I think that's definitely affected public reception to the Disney experience overall.
It has, and it really is kind of a corporate thing. Like, I've noticed this in my personal life, like with my job, which, you know, I have a regular 9 to 5, you know, and they'll implement new programs, new systems, new policies. And it's like a lot of this stuff is like redundant and just more busy work that just takes longer, and it's like kind of pointless. And it's typical of these big corporations to kind of layer on these useless things. And I can kind of see that happening with Disney parks. It's kind of like it looks good on a spreadsheet, but maybe in actual execution, not the greatest kind of thing. They really need to look at what Universal's doing and even other competitors and sort of craft their programs to be a little more user friendly. And they got to divert the heat a little bit, man. Like the fandom is so mad right now. They got to do something to sort of kind of quelch that, to kind of de-escalate the anger. You know, and like I said, I mean, fans, I've said it many times. I mean, fans can be unreasonable, and they want it all. They want to get into the park easily. They want unlimited access. They want to pay dirt, you know, rock bottom prices. They want a $1 billion e-ticket every other year. I get it. I'm on Disney's side when it comes to that. I think a lot of fans are unreasonable. At the same time, though, fans also make good points, and fans also do come with critiques, constructive critiques that are valid. And I think Disney needs to listen to some of those. And I think the reservation system and Genie Plus are two of those programs I think Disney really needs to revisit reimagine, as they say over at Disney.
Oh yeah, no, I personally agree with you. I mean, and people have had critiques about the Disney experience before, but you know, with these programs in particular, with these things that are definitely affecting a wider set of guests than maybe they ever have before, you know, it highlights those critiques. It makes them bubble up to the top, so to speak, and it dominates the conversation. And I hope Disney's listening. Now, some of it's Disney's doing, where we talked about on previous shows how Walt Disney World is a little bit underbuilt, right? And that has led to some capacity constraints, you know, in the time that you've had year over year attendance growth. You necessarily haven't built, you know, attractions at your parks. Epcot, for example, right? Before Cosmic Rewind, the last you know, thrill ride to be added to Epcot was like 15 years before, you know, before that. You know, that's just unreasonable, you know, if you're going to have year-over-year gains for attendance. So some of it, you know, they did it to themselves, but other things like the market, for example, the labor market, right? Yeah. Even in that Fresh Baked video that we just showed a portion of, right before that, Disney's adjusting their policy at Disneyland when it comes to call-outs and so forth, in order to deal with some of these strict labor issues that not just Disney's being affected by, but the entire, you know, market is being affected by. Right. And that hurts Disneyland and Walt Disney World by extension a lot because of their demands when it comes to, you know, cast to actually, you know, work these places that we all love. And it's tough. So, you know, with those kind of things still being what they are, I think the reservation system is here to stay. This is why it's being reiterated by executives that it is here to stay. Not just because they like it, but because it's an operational necessity at this point in order to manage this huge demand they have. Right. That might change later on with different market conditions. Yeah. You know, and you know, as we kind of go into what we say the R word when it comes to economic conditions, maybe that does affect them in some way and gets them to reevaluate these programs. And we can already see they're getting ahead of that, at least with Genie Plus, right? Yeah, they're changing that program a lot based on feedback that they've received and based on the operational demands that they placed on it. So we're just gonna have to see what they do from here.
Yeah, a lot of changes are coming. I mean, with the Magic Key lawsuit, you can expect big changes to the Magic Key program when renewals come around in August. Can guarantee you that. I mean, the blockout stuff is going to be completely scrubbed from that. You know, they're going to reimagine that completely. You're right. I mean, you know, like the market conditions and all that stuff, it plays a huge factor. I know my job. You touched upon like the attendance policy and all that. My job has really kind of tightened up too in regards to that. It's tough out there right now. Just the whole market is struggling right now with labor, and I can't just call out sick like willy-nilly like I used to be able to. You know, it's tough out there, and Disney's adapting too. And you know, it's not easy. It's not easy for anybody. It sucks, man. It really does suck. You know, you got to make a call sometimes. You know, it does. Yeah.
And some of these things are going to be unpopular. Some of these things we're not going to like. But it's just like, what else can we do? You know, right? We made the argument on this show that Walt Disney World, like I said, is underbuilt. Right? Ideally, I'd love to see increased capacity in the form of high capacity attractions being added to these parks, and that includes Disneyland DCA. But think about their liquidity issues. Think about their debt that they are still in from deals like the Fox deal. Right? Think about, you know, they're not even paying dividends still. It's just all of these things that you know. Us as fans looking at it go, oh, this is the obvious decision. This is what you got to do. But it's like, there's an operational reality as well. Yeah. You know, it's like when you take aside $32 billion and you know, all of that goes to the studio. I mean, that's a prioritization there. And that's a decision that you have to make. You know, it's like, yeah, the theme park operation obviously is a big part of our business, but we're an entertainment and studio division first.
Oh, they are. You know? Absolutely. I mean,
you got to make tough calls.
You got to make those tough calls, and the studio feeds everything. I mean, we live in an IP world, and without the look, I know a lot of fans, and including myself, actually. Look, we have a buddy Showcase, right? We love Showcase.
Love Showcase of Wishes.
Oh, he's amazing. I love Showcase. Good friend of ours. you know, he's kind of an Epcot purist, right? Mm-hmm. And he talks about like, you know, the dinos that they removed from Epcot and all this stuff. And my heart goes out to that because I, as a Disney fan, I look at that stuff and I'm like, that looks cooler than Guardians of the Galaxy. I'd much rather have the dinos. I'd much rather have these non-IP things. I think it's way more interesting. Unfortunately, it's just not the world we live in. Unfortunately, the general public wants the Frozen ride. Unfortunately, the general public wants that Guardians thing. And it's just a reality. And the only way you can kind of get those properties into these parks is if the studio is churning that shit out nonstop. And that's why I think Disney's really focusing on that studio side, because it really is kind of like the heartbeat of the whole operation. It really is.
It does. And as a heartbeat, it provides blood to the entire system, right? And that includes the theme park division. If the studio division ain't doing well, the theme park division will suffer because of it. And everybody's like, well, that's not true. Well, trust me, during like the, you know, late 60s, 70s, and early 80s, that was definitely the case up until Michael Eisner came in and said, hey, we got to get the studio back on board, and that'll fuel the parks, and it did, right? But that's why we had, you know, some stuff in the 70s that wasn't the best or wasn't themed to necessarily an IP that people wanted, because they just weren't churning out things that appealed to people. And Tony Baxter was a big advocate for IP, interestingly enough, because it's a shortcut that you could use as a storytelling device for your attraction. You don't require the setup. People have a built-in love of the franchises that we produce, and just on that alone, that'll book vacations, and that'll allow for a better experience in the end. So, I mean, again, I do agree with the prioritization of the studio division, no question. Do I agree that maybe they, you know, maybe $30 billion worth, and then leaving almost nothing for the you know, theme park side? I'm not necessarily going that far, but if you're going to prioritize one thing over another, these are the kind of decisions you make. You know, we're just going to have to see how this all kind of shakes out.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that whole thing is kind of changing too. Like Wall Street's sort of souring to this idea of just like this narrow focus of subscribers for the streamers.
Right.
They're starting to want to see some results with the money.
100%.
So I think we're going to start see a little bit of slowdown, a little bit with some of the spending for these streamers.
At least for Disney Plus, we might see some additional spending for you know, theatrical production for theatrical release.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing.
100%. Brother, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. We had a fantastic conversation today in regards to Reedy Creek, Universal, you know, surveys and reservations, and really good time. Interesting stuff. If you can let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Hey, best place to interact with me is going to be @VashSky on Twitter. It's right down there, just like it's spelled right there, for all your robust discussion, as Christine Wasteland McCarthy would say, right? Yeah, the robust discussion alert. There you go. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now in Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. By the way, sir, that clip from Jim Hill Media and Len Testa featured something else that I think we should talk about on the next show, if you'd be so kind. They talk about Splash Mountain and why they haven't necessarily heard anything on that. I think that right there is a very, very interesting discussion, especially before Duke Joins the Expo.
We'll have that conversation. We'll talk about days and times. We'll definitely do that.
You got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Sounds great. And thank you all for watching. We do appreciate your feedback. Every time you like the video, share the video. We got a lot of love on the sharers. Matthew Murr, Theme Park Casual. There's so many of you share these videos out, and it does not go unnoticed. We love you guys and gals for sharing, liking, watching, supporting our stuff. It means a lot. We put a lot of work into this stuff. So thank you. And if you are not subscribed to Theme Park Casual, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah. No, Theme Park Casual is great. His first video, awesome. And it's doing bonkers. First video, you're killing it, Casual. You're killing it. Down below, I will link his video as well with everything else. Give him a subscribe. He's awesome. If you're into theme parks, definitely give him a check out. But thank you all for watching, and thank you, Dre, for coming on. As always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Sector 2. Malfunction in Sector 2. All droids will be shut down for reloading of labor programs. Stand by for power disconnect.